Aloan Malice accepted the position at Vane Manor because the wages were triple the norm, and her landlady had given her an ultimatum: pay up or get out. She read the discretion essential clause and assumed it covered boring scandals or the gambling debts of some eccentric aristocrat. She was wrong. The house's silence didn't hide human vices, but a lonely child with ancient eyes starving for a mother, and a cruel fiancé who enjoyed crushing that desire. Elowen believed she was hired to dust a gothic mausoleum. She didn't realize her true job would be defying a vampire king to save the only living soul in a house of the dead. The carriage wheels ground to a halt on gravel that sounded like broken glass beneath the horse's hooves. Through the fogged window, Vane Manor rose against the twilight sky, a mass of blackened stone and iron spires that seemed to drink the fading light rather than reflect it. The air tasted of rain that hadn't yet fallen, metallic and cold on my tongue. I pressed my palm against the leather seat to steady myself. My fingers left marks in the condensation clinging to everything in this damp country. The advertisement had been simple: asterisk maid required, room and board, discretion essential. Asterisk. The wages were triple what any respectable household offered, and I'd learned not to question fortune when it knocked. My landlady's threats still echoed in my skull: 3 months' rent or the workhouse. The choice had made itself. The driver, who hadn't spoken a single word during the 2-hour journey, opened the door. Cold rushed in like something alive, wrapping around my ankles and crawling up my spine beneath my thin coat. I stepped down, my worn boots crunching on that glass gravel, and looked up at the manor's face. Windows like empty eye sockets, no light behind them, though surely someone must be home. Someone had hired me. Your trunk, miss. Condosa. The driver's voice was rough, unused. He set my single battered case on the ground and was back on his seat before I could thank him. Whole. The carriage pulled away with unseemly haste, leaving me alone with the sound of wind moving through dead ivy that clung to the manor's walls. The front door was oak, black with age, fitted with iron hinges that looked medieval. I raised my hand to knock, but the door swung inward before my knuckles touched wood. The man standing in the doorway was ancient, not old, ancient. Old, ancient, old. His face was a map of wrinkles so deep they created shadows in shadows. He wore formal livery from another century, immaculately maintained, but decades out of fashion. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colorless. Miss Maylis, not a question. His voice rattled like wind through a crypt. You are expected. Yes. Huld, I'm here about the position. My voice sounded too loud, too warm in the cold silence surrounding us. He stepped aside, a movement that seemed to cost him effort. I am Silas. I manage the household. You will address the master as Lord Vane, should he deign to speak with you. You will address Lady Rowena as my lady. You will not enter the east wing. You will not ask questions. The entrance hall swallowed me whole. The ceiling soared into darkness above, lost in shadows that no amount of lamplight could penetrate. To a chandelier hung like a frozen waterfall of crystal, unlit. The walls were panelled in wood so dark it was nearly black, hung with portraits whose subjects seemed to watch with disapproving eyes. The temperature inside was no warmer than outside, colder perhaps, as if the stones themselves had never known heat. My breath misted in the air. The child requires constant supervision, Silas continued, leading me deeper into the manor's throat. Our footsteps echoed on marble floors. She does not speak, she does not play as children do. You will ensure she eats, though she rarely does. You will read to her. You will not ask why. How old is she? The question escaped before I could stop it. Silas paused mid-step. The silence stretched so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. 7 years, in appearance. What a strange way to phrase it. We climbed a staircase that curved like a spine, The banister was ice beneath my palm. Portraits lined the wall, men and women in clothing spanning centuries, all with the same unsettling beauty, the same pale skin and dark eyes. At the top, a hallway stretched into dimness, doors lining both sides like teeth in a jaw. Silas stopped before one door, different from the others. This one was painted white, incongruous against the manor's gothic darkness. He knocked, 3 soft taps, and opened it without waiting for response. The room beyond was a shock of warmth and colour. A fire burned in a small hearth, casting golden light across walls, painted pale blue. Toys sat in careful arrangements on shelves, wooden horses, porcelain dolls, picture books with gilt edges. A canopy bed draped in white lace dominated one corner, and in a chair by the fire, so still I almost missed her, sat the child. She was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. Pale skin, almost translucent in the firelight. Dark hair that fell in perfect waves to her waist. She wore a velvet dress the color of midnight, far too formal for a child. Her feet, in silk slippers, dangled above the floor, but it was her eyes that stopped my heart. Dark and ancient, fixed on the flames with an intensity that seemed to see through them to something beyond. She didn't turn when we entered, didn't acknowledge our presence at all. "Seraphina," Silas said, his voice softening, in a way I hadn't thought possible. "This is Miss Elowen. She will be caring for you." Nothing, not even a flicker of movement. Silas gestured for me to approach. I moved slowly, as if approaching a wild creature that might bolt. The heat from the fire was almost painful after the cold of the rest of the house. I knelt beside her chair, bringing myself to her eye level. "Hello, Seraphina," I said softly. "That's a beautiful name." Her eyes shifted. Haunt, not to me, through me. As if I were made of glass and she was looking at something on the other side. Up close, I could see the shadows beneath her eyes, purple dark against that porcelain skin. She was thin, too thin, her wrists like bird bones, where they emerged from her velvet sleeves. "She will not respond," Silas said, from the doorway. "She has not spoken in 3 years. The physicians can find no cause. You will grow accustomed to it." But something in me rebelled against that cold acceptance. I'd seen silence before, the silence of grief, of fear, of children who'd learned that speaking brought only pain. This felt different. This felt like a choice, or perhaps a prison. "May I sit with her?" I asked. Silas nodded. "Your quarters adjoin this room." In that door, he pointed to a white door I hadn't noticed, nearly invisible, against the pale wall. "You will take your meals here, with the child. You will not leave her alone, after dark. You will ring, if there is trouble." He left before I could ask what kind of trouble he meant. I settled onto the floor, beside Seraphina's chair, my back against its leg, and simply sat. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the manor's depths, a clock chimed the hour. 7 bells. Deep and resonant. Outside the window, full darkness had fallen. "I'm not very good at being quiet," I said eventually, speaking to the fire as much as to her. "My mother used to say I was born talking. I suppose that makes us opposites. You and I, nothing." But I thought, perhaps imagined, that her breathing changed slightly. I continued talking, filling the silence with stories of my journey, of the strange driver, of Silas and his cryptic warnings. I described the portraits in the hallway, making up elaborate histories for the severe faces. I told her about the city I'd left behind, the boarding house, with its peeling wallpaper, and the landlady's cat that had only 3 legs. An hour passed. Then, too, the fire burned low. I rose to add wood from the brass bucket, and when I turned back, Seraphina had moved, just slightly. Her head tilted a fraction toward where I'd been sitting. My heart leapt. I returned to my spot, continuing my one-sided conversation. This time, I pulled a book from the nearest shelf, a fairy tale collection, leather-bound and beautiful. I began to read, letting my voice rise and fall with the story's rhythm. Halfway through the tale of a princess in a tower, I felt it, the lightest touch on my shoulder. Seraphina's small hand, cold as marble, resting there. I didn't stop reading, didn't acknowledge it, terrified that any reaction would break whatever fragile connection had formed. The door burst open. A woman stood in the doorway, and the temperature plummeted. She was stunning, the kind of beauty that belonged in paintings, not reality. Tall and slender, with hair like spilled ink, and skin that seemed to glow against her crimson gown. But her eyes were chips of black ice, and her mouth was a slash of displeasure. "What?" she said, her voice like silk over razor blades. "Do you think you're doing?" I scrambled to my feet, the book tumbling from my lap. Elowen Maylis, the new maid. I was just reading to her. "Yes, I can see that." She glided into the room, and I realized she made no sound, no footsteps, no rustle of fabric. How quaint. Seraphina's hand had withdrawn. The child sat frozen again, staring at nothing. The woman, this had to be Lady Rowena, circled me like a predator, assessing prey. "You reek of the city, of coal smoke and desperation. Did you truly think you could simply insert yourself into this child's life?" I was hired to care for her, I managed, though my voice shook. "You were hired to keep her fed and clothed. Nothing more." Rowena stopped in front of Seraphina, one pale hand touching the child's hair, with something that might have been tenderness or possession. "She doesn't need your stories or your warmth. She needs discipline, structure. She needs to understand her place. She's 7 years old," I said before I could stop myself. Rowena's head snapped toward me, and I saw her eyes flash, literally flash, like light, catching on metal. "She is not your concern beyond your duties, and you would do well to remember." She leaned close, her breath cold against my ear. "She is not your daughter. She is not even entirely human. So cease this pathetic attempt at maternal affection." The words hit like a slap. I stepped back, my spine meeting the wall. Rowena straightened, smoothing her gown. "Do your job, Miss Maylis. Nothing more." She turned to leave, and that's when I saw him. In the doorway stood a man who made Rowena's beauty seem ordinary. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair black as a raven's wing, and features carved from marble. He wore black from throat to boots, and his eyes, God, his eyes were the color of blood in shadow. They fixed on me with an intensity that stopped my breath. "Rowena," he said, his voice, deep and resonant, carrying centuries in its timbre. "That will be enough, Lord Vane. It could be no one else." "She oversteps, Thaddeus," Rowena said, but her voice had changed, become almost pleading. "She does her job." His eyes never left mine. "Leave us." Rowena's face contorted with fury, but she obeyed, sweeping past him with a hiss of silk and rage. The Thaddeus Vane stepped into the room, and the shadows seemed to follow him. He looked at Seraphina, and something in his expression softened, just for a moment, just enough to reveal the grief beneath the ice. Then those crimson eyes returned to me, and they were glowing. "Welcome to Vane Manor, Miss Maylis," he said softly. "I do hope you survive it." The silence stretched between us like a living thing. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic drum against my ribs, and wondered if he could hear it too. His eyes, those impossible crimson eyes, held mine with a weight that made my knees weak. "My lord," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I dropped into a curtsy, grateful for the excuse to break that burning gaze. "Rise." The command was soft but absolute. I obeyed, and found him closer than before. I hadn't seen him move. The air around him carried the scent of old books, and something darker, something that made my pulse quicken with an instinct older than thought. You care for my daughter. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, my lord. She's a remarkable child. She is dangerous. He moved past me to Seraphina's bedside, and I watched the way shadows clung to him, reluctant to let go. His hand hovered over her sleeping form, never quite touching. To herself, to others, to you, most of all. She's 7 years old. His laugh was bitter, barely a sound. She is 7 years old, and strong enough to snap your spine without meaning to. She is 7 years old, and has never tasted human blood, which makes her perpetually starving. She is 7 years old, and will watch you age and die while she remains unchanged. He turned back to me, and the grief in his face was so raw, it hurt to witness. Tell me, Miss Malice, how do you protect a child from what she is? The question hung in the air between us. I thought of Seraphina's loneliness, her careful control, the way she flinched from her own strength. You love her, I said. That's how you start. Something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or pain. Love is not always enough. It's more than she has now. The words escaped before I could stop them. His expression hardened, and I realized my mistake. But instead of anger, I saw only exhaustion in those ancient eyes. You speak boldly for someone who understands nothing of our world. Then help me understand. He studied me for a long moment, and I felt stripped bare under that gaze, as if he could see every secret I'd ever kept. Finally, he moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain, just enough to reveal the moon-washed gardens below. We are vampires, Miss Malice. Surely you've guessed by now. His voice was matter-of-fact, discussing the weather. We drink blood to survive. We do not age. We do not die, except by very specific means. And we do not love easily, because everyone we might love will turn to dust while we remain. The confirmation should have terrified me. Instead, I felt only a strange sense of rightness, as if some part of me had known all along. And Seraphina, Dhampir, half human, half vampire, rare, precious, forbidden by most of the old laws. His fingers tightened on the curtain. Her mother was human. A mistake I made 500 years ago, when I still believed I could have something resembling a normal life. 500 years. The number was incomprehensible. What happened to her mother? Childbirth. The word was hollow. Dhampir, Hargrey. Pregnancies are brutal. The child's strength, the vampire blood, it tears the mother apart from the inside. I knew the risks, and she insisted anyway. She wanted to give me something that would last. His laugh was broken glass. And now I have a daughter I cannot touch without fearing I'll lose control. And a fiancée who would see her dead. Rowena. Rowena. He let the curtain fall, plunging us back into shadow. Who believes that Seraphina's existence is an abomination? Who has convinced half the vampire council that a Dhampir child is too dangerous to live? Who agreed to marry me only if I send Seraphina away to a monastery in the mountains, where she will be contained? The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. You're not going to send her away. I am trying to find another option. He turned back to me, and the desperation in his face made him seem almost human. But time is running out. The council arrives in 3 weeks to make their judgment. If they rule against her, what will you do? Whatever I must. The words were a vow and a threat. Even if it means war, the weight of it settled over me. The impossible choice. The centuries of loneliness. The love that had become a cage. I looked at Seraphina, peaceful in sleep, unaware of the forces gathering against her. Let me help. Thaddeus shook his head. You cannot. I can be what she needs. Someone who isn't afraid of her. Someone who doesn't see her as a monster or a mistake. I stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the unnatural cold radiating from his skin. Someone human, who can remind her that half of what she is doesn't have to be a curse. He stared at me, and I watched something shift behind his eyes. You don't know what you're offering. Then tell me. The council will see you as a threat. Rowena already does. And he stopped, jaw tightening. I am not safe, Miss Malice. I have gone too long without feeding properly. I am holding on by will alone, and you smell like... He turned away sharply. You should go. But I didn't move, couldn't move. Like what? Like everything I've denied myself for 500 years. Or the confession was raw, torn from somewhere deep, like sunlight and summer rain, and all the warm living things I can never have. So please, for your own sake, leave this room before I forget why I must not. A scream shattered the moment. It came from somewhere below, high and terrified, and abruptly cut off. Thaddeus moved faster than sight at the door before I could blink. I ran after him, my heart hammering, and found him frozen at the top of the grand staircase. The entrance hall below was chaos, servants scattered like frightened birds, and in the center of it all stood Rowena, her gown splattered with red. At her feet lay Isolde, one of the kitchen maids, her throat torn open, her eyes staring at nothing. She was stealing, Rowena said calmly, wiping blood from her mouth with a silk handkerchief. From the wine cellar. I merely disciplined her. You killed her. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Rowena's smile was sharp. She's a servant, replaceable. Rowena. Thaddeus's voice was ice and iron. My study. Now. But darling, now. She went, but not before casting me a look of pure venom. Thaddeus followed, and I was left staring at Isolde's body, at the spreading pool of blood, at the other servants who wouldn't meet my eyes. Silas appeared at my elbow, his weathered face grim. Come away, miss. Nothing to be done now. She murdered her, and she'll do worse before this is over. He guided me away from the railing, his grip gentle but firm. You need to understand something, Miss Malice. This house has rules, and they're not the rules you're used to. Lord Vane, he tries to be civilized, tries to remember what it was to be human. But Lady Rowena, she's old blood, old ways. To her, we're cattle. Thaddeus won't let her. Lord Vane, Silas corrected quietly, is fighting battles on too many fronts. The council, his daughter, his own nature. He can't protect everyone. His eyes were kind but sad, especially not a human girl who's caught his attention. The words sent ice through my veins. I haven't. I've served this house for 40 years, miss. I know the signs. He released my arm. Be careful. The safest thing for you would be to do your job, keep your head down, and stay far away from family matters. But I thought of Seraphina's small hand in mine, of the loneliness in Thaddeus's eyes, of the way he'd looked at me like I was both salvation and damnation. I can't do that. Silas sighed. No, I didn't think you could. Hi. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange tense rhythm. I kept to my duties with Seraphina, teaching her letters and numbers, reading her stories, playing quiet games in the nursery. But everything had changed. I saw her differently now. Noticed the way her eyes sometimes flashed red when she was frustrated. The careful control in every movement, the hunger she tried to hide. And I saw Thaddeus everywhere. He appeared in doorways when I least expected it, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. He joined us for lessons sometimes, sitting silent in the corner, and I felt his gaze on me like a physical touch. Once, when Seraphina fell asleep during a story, he crossed the room and stood so close I could feel the cold radiating from him. She's never been this content, he said softly. Not since her mother died. She just needs to know she's loved. And you. His voice dropped lower. What do you need, Aloan? The use of my first name sent a shiver through me. I looked up at him, at the way the lamplight caught in his dark hair, at the careful distance he maintained between us. I need to know she'll be safe. That's not what I asked. The air between us felt charged, dangerous. I should have stepped back, should have remembered my place. the impossibility of everything I was feeling. Instead I said, I need to understand why you look at me the way you do. His jaw tightened. I look at you the way a starving man looks at a feast he cannot touch. Why can't you? Because I would destroy you. He turned away, hands clenched at his sides. Because I am a monster wearing a man's face. And you are the first thing in centuries that has made me want to be human again. And that wanting is the most dangerous thing of all. Before I could respond, the door burst open. Rowena stood there, her face twisted with rage. How touching, she hissed. The vampire king and the human maid. What a pretty picture for the council to see when they arrive tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word dropped like a stone. They're early, Thaddeus said, his voice carefully neutral. I sent word to expedite their visit. After all, why wait when there's an abomination under your roof? Rona's smile was cruel. They'll be here by nightfall. Elder Cassius himself leads them. I do hope you've prepared your arguments, darling, though I suspect they'll be more interested in why you've allowed a human to become so familiar with family matters. She swept out, leaving silence in her wake. Thaddeus closed his eyes. You need to leave, tonight, before they arrive. No, Aloan. I won't abandon her. I move to stand between him and Seraphina's sleeping form. I won't let them take her without a fight. You cannot fight the council. You are human. They will kill you without a second thought. Then teach me what I need to know. Help me understand how to protect her. He stared at me, and I saw the war raging behind his eyes. Duty and desire, fear and hope. The weight of centuries against the fragile possibility of something new. If you stay, he said finally, everything changes. There is no going back. I know. He crossed to me in 2 strides, caught my face in his cold hands. His thumb traced my cheekbone, and his eyes were burning. I cannot love you, he whispered. I cannot keep you. I cannot promise you anything but danger and pain. But God help me, Elowen. I cannot let you go. His mouth was an inch from mine, and I could feel the tremor in his hands, the iron control barely holding. Then, don't, I breathed. The kiss was ice and fire, gentle and desperate, and it tasted like 500 years of loneliness finally breaking. His arms came around me, careful even in passion, and I felt the rapid hammer of my heart against the stillness of his chest. When he pulled back, his eyes were glowing crimson, his fangs visible, and he looked more dangerous and more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen. You are mine now, he said, and it was both a promise and a warning, and I protect what is mine. The next evening, they came, 5 vampires, ancient and terrible, led by Elder Cassius, a creature so old he barely seemed real anymore, his skin like parchment, his eyes black as the void. They gathered in the great hall, and I stood with Seraphina, my hand in hers, while Thaddeus faced them across an expanse of marble floor. The Dhampir child, Cassius said, his voice like wind through dead leaves. She is an anomaly, a violation of natural law. She is my daughter. She is an abomination. Rowena stepped forward, her face triumphant, half human, half vampire, belonging to neither world. She will grow to be a threat to us all. She is 7 years old. She is a monster. Cassius's black eyes fixed on Seraphina, who pressed closer to my side, and she has been corrupted further by human attachment. This woman, he gestured to me, she has made the child weak, sentimental. She must be removed. No, Thaddeus's voice was flat, absolute. It is not a request, Thaddeus Vane. It is a decree. The human leaves tonight, or we will remove her ourselves. And the child, Cassius paused, letting the silence stretch. The child will be sent to the monastery, where she will learn what she truly is. Over my dead body, that can be arranged. Of the temperature in the room plummeted. Power crackled in the air, old and vast and terrible. I felt Seraphina trembling against me, and I pulled her closer, my heart racing. There is another option. Rowena's voice was silk over steel. Send the human away willingly. Prove that you can still think clearly, that you haven't been compromised by her influence. Agree to the monastery for Seraphina, and in return, the council will allow you to retain your position, your power, your life. Thaddeus looked at me across the room, and I saw everything in his face. The love he couldn't speak, the choice he couldn't make, the agony of 500 years crashing down on him. Choose, Thaddeus, Cassius said. The human or your daughter, your heart or your duty. You cannot have both. The silence was suffocating. Seraphina's hand tightened in mine, and I felt tears on my cheeks, though I couldn't remember starting to cry. Thaddeus closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were empty. Elowen Males will leave Vane Manor tonight, he said, his voice hollow. She will be compensated for her service and escorted safely to the nearest town. She is to have no further contact with this family. The words hit like knives. Seraphina sobbed, and I felt my heart shatter. My lord, go. He wouldn't look at me. Now, before I change my mind, Silas appeared at my side, his hand on my arm, pulling me away. I stumbled, my eyes locked on Thaddeus, willing him to look at me, to take it back, to fight. But he stood like a statue, his face carved from ice, while Rowena smiled in triumph, and the council looked on with cold satisfaction. Please, I whispered, but I didn't know if I was begging him, or the universe, or God. As Silas led me from the hall, I heard Seraphina's scream, raw and broken and full of betrayal, and I heard Thaddeus's voice, so quiet I almost missed it. Forgive me. The door closed behind me, with a sound like a coffin lid falling shut. The corridor was endless. My footsteps echoed against stone that had witnessed centuries of suffering, and each step took me farther from the only home I'd ever truly known. Silas's grip on my arm was gentle but unyielding, his weathered face carved with grief. I'm sorry, child, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Behind us, Seraphina's screams had dissolved into broken sobs that clawed at my chest. I stopped walking. The sound of her crying, that small, desperate sound, ignited something in me that burned hotter than fear. No. Silas's hand fell away. Miss Elowen. No. I turned back toward the hall. I won't leave her. I won't leave him to this. The council has decreed. Damn the council. The words tasted like rebellion and freedom. Damn their laws and their centuries of cruelty. That little girl needs me. And Thaddeus. My voice cracked. He needs me to be braver than he can be right now. Silas studied my face for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. A spark of the man who'd once been young enough to believe in impossible things. Then you'd better hurry. Rowena's already moving to formalize the custody transfer. I ran. The great hall doors burst open under my hands, and every immortal face turned toward me. Rowena stood beside Thaddeus now, her hand possessively on his arm, while Seraphina huddled on the floor where I'd left her, small and shaking. Elder Cassius's eyebrows rose in cold surprise. The human returns, he said. How tedious. I'm not leaving. My voice rang through the vaulted space, steadier than my racing heart. You can't make me. Rowena laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Can't we? You're mortal, little maid. Fragile. One of us could snap your neck before you drew another breath. Then do it. I walked forward, past the council, past the assembled vampires, who watched with predatory interest. I walked until I stood between them all and Seraphina. But you'll have to kill me to take her. Thaddeus's mask cracked. Elowen. Don't. What? Don't. Love you. I met his eyes and saw the agony there, the war raging behind that beautiful, terrible face. You think sending me away will keep me safe? You think I can just walk out of here and forget? that I can pretend the last year didn't happen. The council has ruled, Cassius began, but I rounded on him. Your council is afraid. The words came from somewhere deep and true. You're terrified of what we represent. A vampire who loves a human. A Dhampir child who bridges both worlds. You've built your power on separation, on the belief that you're superior, untouchable. But we prove you're not. Silence fell like snow. You prove nothing, Rowena hissed, except that humans are delusional. Thaddeus has already chosen. He sent you away. He chose his daughter's safety. That's not the same as choosing you. I turned back to Thaddeus, my heart in my throat. I know you're afraid. I know 500 years of conditioning tells you this is impossible. But I also know what I see when you look at me, what I feel when you touch me, what Seraphina feels when we're together. Behind me, I heard the little girl's sob catch, transform into something like hope. This is absurd, Rowena snapped. Cassius, end this. Have your enforcers remove her. Two massive vampires stepped forward, their movements liquid and inhuman. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept my eyes on Thaddeus. If you let them take me, I said softly, if you let them tear apart what we've built, you'll lose more than me. You'll lose yourself, the part of you that's still capable of feeling, of changing, of being more than just an ancient thing going through the motions of existence. The enforcers reached for me. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the floor in branching patterns, climbing the walls, turning the air to visible mist. The enforcers froze, not metaphorically, but literally, ice crystals forming on their skin as they stumbled back. Every candle in the hall extinguished at once, leaving only the cold light of the moon through the high windows. Thaddeus stood at the center of the darkness, and his eyes blazed crimson. Touch her, he said, his voice resonating with power that made the ancient stones tremble, and I will show you why they called me the Blood King. The title hung in the air like a curse. I'd never heard it before, but the council clearly had. Cassius actually took a step back. Thaddeus, he said carefully, you cannot threaten the council. We are the law. Your law is broken. Thaddeus moved, and suddenly he was beside me, his hand finding mine. His skin was ice cold, but his grip was sure. For 5 centuries, I've obeyed, I've bowed, I've sacrificed every shred of happiness on the altar of your rules. No more. You'll be cast out, Rowena breathed, her perfect face twisted with fury. Stripped of your title, your lands, your power, then strip them. Thaddeus pulled me closer, and I felt the tremor in his hand, the centuries of fear he was defying. I choose her, I choose my daughter, I choose the possibility of something real, over the certainty of your cold eternity. Seraphina launched herself at us, wrapping her small arms around both our legs, and I felt Thaddeus shudder. When I looked up at him, there were tears on his face, actual tears, red as wine, tracking down his pale cheeks. You'll regret this, Cassius said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The only thing I regret, Thaddeus replied, is not doing this sooner. The council began to murmur, a sound like wind through dead leaves. Some looked outraged, others curious, uncertain, as if watching something they'd thought impossible actually unfold before their ancient eyes. This is not over, Rowena spat. She turned on her heel, her gown sweeping across the frost-covered floor. The council will hear of your defiance. You'll be hunted, destroyed. Let them try. She left in a storm of fury and shattered pride, several council members following, but others remained, watching with expressions I couldn't quite read. Cassius stood the longest, his ageless face thoughtful. Perhaps, he said finally, the old ways are not the only ways. He inclined his head, not quite a bow, but an acknowledgement. We will observe, for now. Then he too was gone, and we were left in the frozen hall, with only Silas and a handful of servants who'd stayed loyal. The ice began to melt, water running in rivulets across the ancient stones. Thaddeus sank to his knees, pulling both Seraphina and me down with him. His arms wrapped around us, and he was shaking, this ancient, powerful creature, trembling like a man who'd just stepped back from the edge of an abyss. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my hair. "I'm so sorry. I thought sending you away would save you, but I was just afraid, so afraid of losing you, that I almost threw you away myself." I know. I held him as tightly as I could, feeling his cold seeping into my warmth bleeding into his cold, until we were something in between. "I know." Seraphina's small voice rose between us. "You stayed, you came back. Always, I promised. I'll always come back." We stayed there on the floor, as the last of the ice melted, as dawn began to grey the windows, as the impossible thing we'd done began to settle into reality. Silas quietly ushered the remaining servants away, giving us this moment of privacy in the aftermath of our defiance. "What happens now?" I asked eventually. Thaddeus lifted his head, and his eyes were still red but no longer blazing, just tired, so impossibly tired. "Now we figure out how to live with what we've chosen. The council may come for us. Other vampires will see us as weak, or dangerous, or both. We'll be outcasts in a world that doesn't understand what we're trying to build. But we'll be together. But we'll be together." He touched my face with fingers that were already warming slightly in the rising sun. "All three of us. A family that shouldn't exist, defying laws that shouldn't matter." Seraphina pressed closer between us, and I felt her heartbeat faster than mine, slower than a human child's, the rhythm of someone caught between two worlds, but belonging fully to neither, or perhaps belonging to both. "I love you," Thaddeus said, and the words were raw and new, as if he'd never spoken them in 500 years. "I love you, Aloan Malus, and I don't care who knows it or what it costs. I love you too." I kissed him as the first ray of sunlight broke through the windows, and he didn't burn, didn't turn to ash, just held me tighter, this impossible man who'd chosen love over law, heart over duty, hope over the safety of certainty. Outside, I heard birds beginning their morning songs. Inside, Seraphina's breathing had evened into sleep, exhausted by the night's trauma and triumph. And in Thaddeus's arms, I felt the future unfold, uncertain, dangerous, but ours. The manor would need repairs. The staff would need reassurance. The world would need time to accept what we'd become. But for now, in this moment, we had each other, and that was enough.